Espresso is an enigma, a mystery wrapped in a riddle, like a turducken or a sproducken of sorts. And essentially what I mean by that is it's both very complex, but also it can be rather simple. On one side of the coin, you've got what can feel like essentially an endless list of variables that can affect its outcome. But when it comes down to it, a lot of the focus really lands on the big ones, and that's grind, temperature, pressure, and time. It's only once you've fully let go of reality that you begin to think about brewing espresso and the variables less traveled. And recently someone asked my thoughts specifically on the less traveled variable of flat flow espresso profiles. And honestly, up until this point in my coffee career, I had never heard of this. And to me, at least in my mind, knowing what I know about espresso machines, it just sounded like a standard espresso, because most machines, when you hit the brew switch, put out just a standard or consistent rate of flow. But when I sat down and tried it and actually watched the machines flow via the decent software, surprise, surprise, it's a bit more complicated than that. So today we are going to be focusing down on flow rate, or water debit, which is essentially measured in milliliters or grams per second, oftentimes with the portafilter out of the group. And we'll dive into what flat flow espresso profiles are, how they work, and find out if there's something to be learned from them. But first, before we get into the weeds, we need to get into the water, with a quick word from this video's sponsor, Third Wave Water. When it comes to brewing the best coffee, quality ingredients matter. And purely by the numbers, water makes up to 98% of what's in your cup, and it's absolutely vital to the long-term reliability of your equipment. So after months of testing and trials, I've landed on Third Wave Water formulas for all of my coffee preparation. And not only is it formulated to not produce scale or cause corrosion, but there's an option for every palate. Third Wave Water offers a wide variety of mineral blends, specifically designed to get the most out of your favorite roast level or brew type. So take control of one of the most important variables for brewing quality coffee today, and head over to thirdwavewater.com/Sprometheus or use code Sprometheus at checkout to save 10% off your first purchase. Thanks to Third Wave Water for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back into it. Now this section for a lot of people may be just a little bit of a review, but I have a point to it, so bear with me. When it comes to brewing espresso, there's no pressure without flow. So when you hit the brew switch, water begins to fill the headspace, which is the area between the puck of coffee and the shower screen. And of course, as this is happening, there is some saturation happening of the puck, but once that headspace is fully filled, water is then being forced through the coffee, right? And that's also increasing the pressure, which then produces espresso. And that's essentially just the basics of how espresso is made. Of course, it should also be said that the pace at which the pressure is built is directly associated with your flow rate or your water debit or whatever you want to call it, because the more water that comes out of the group, the faster the pressure builds and vice versa. But when it comes to flat flow profiles, the full saturation point is where they sort of reach their breaking point. Because when you watch the chart on the decent, you can see the point where the back pressure created by the coffee, that's also at the same time being compressed by the water, is causing the flow rate of the machine to slow down, hence interrupting the water debit and making it no longer a flat flow profile. And all of this is pretty much par for the course when it comes to espresso. It's oftentimes a little more complicated than it appears on the surface, and to achieve a true flat flow espresso shot, you do have to have a bit more than a machine that's just going to put out a constant water debit. Now that we've covered the mechanics, or I guess the theory of how a flat flow profile works, let's get into how it's actually achieved, what it produces in the cup, and if it's actually worth the effort. And as I mentioned in both previous sections, I'm sure there are so many different variables happening here, and that achieving a flat flow profile is beyond having a consistent water debit or flow rate. And one of the main ones it hinges on top of many others, is your grind size. So I started with a standard espresso grind and the peak flow rate on the decent, which is 8 milliliters per second, then pulled a shot and watched the flow rate graph. From there, I found myself dropping the flow about 1 milliliters per second at a time and made slight adjustments coarser until I was able to reach an equilibrium of the grind size and flow to produce a high enough pressure, meaning over 6 bar but under 9, and a shot that was truly a flat flow profile, which for me landed most easily and most often between 3 and 4 milliliters per second. Around the ristretto range of a 1:1 ratio, the shots were syrupy and dense with a full punchy flavor up front, fading into a pleasant coating of my palate with a nice lingering sweetness. In the classic double range of a 1:2 ratio, I found round, balanced, and complex flavors in the cup, and just an overall good drinkable shot. And as I push the ratios wider and wider from 1:3 to 1:5, which I generally do find somewhat unappealing due to the flavors being oftentimes stretched out and watered down, the cups were actually very aromatic and juicy, and had a lot of flavor separation. Alright, so the TLDW, or too long didn't watch, on flat flow profiles, and I'll say just straight off the bat, they're good. They make quality shots of espresso, but I will also say they aren't particularly unique, and they use a lot of the methodologies that we already use for many other different types or styles of espresso. For instance, the relatively long, low-flow, low-pressure start is just your good old-fashioned run-of-the-mill pre-infusion. The smooth but consistent building of pressure is just a controlled ramp-up, and the faster, more consistent rate of extraction due to a coarser grind is kind of the whole theory behind a turbo shot. Really, the only issue I have with them is the difficulty of being able to do them on all machines, which don't always have easily adjustable flow rates. And beyond that, achieving a flat flow profile without some kind of software showing you how the grind and the flow are managing each other, finding that equilibrium I mentioned earlier, it's just a whole lot of guesswork. So I would just say that all is not lost. I would not suffer even an ounce of FOMO if I had a machine that does just a static flow rate and you can't really see all these things happening, because really nothing groundbreaking is happening here. And essentially, it really performs much like a turbo shot than anything else, just slightly longer due to a nice slow ramp up. But anyway, on that note, I think as I wrap up the longest answer that I've ever done for someone's random question on Instagram ever, it's time I pass the conversation on to you. So what are your thoughts on flat flow espresso profiles? Is this the first you've heard of it? Is it something you've tried? Is it something that you do regularly? I'd be curious to hear people's thoughts on this, because up until this point, I had never heard of it. So drop your answers to those questions and any others you may have in the comment section down below. And as always, I'll see y'all in the next video. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hit that little bell button for notifications when new videos drop. Check out my Instagram @Sprometheus for more coffee content. Help support the channel by considering becoming a member for unique exclusive perks. And as always, stay caffeinated. Pony Boy